Добрый день, дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to greet you here. For me, it's an honor to open this session and to close today's session at all, because I really hope that this is the last but not the least. We'll speak today about the topic which has the name of transformation of corporation. If I translate it into the human language, what's the past of the old industrial companies, which were born not technological before the fourth technological revolution, and which face an awful challenge: either they change or they die. This panel discussion has the representatives of really different companies, and not even companies. We have the privilege to have as a guest the representative of the company Konica Minolta. This is the company, like many other companies, is in the process of understanding what they should do further on. We know there are product legendary companies like Nokia who couldn't manage to find the answer onto this question. But there are product companies who have found and are rather successful. We have the privilege here to listen to Professor Loren, the professor from MIT, who's the historian and who knows very well what's going on in this part of the earth in the innovation sphere. And it seems to me that it will be the broadest and the deepest framework we'll discuss together. It won't concern one company only, it will give the whole context. Mr. Ivan Geluch, the only representative of Ukraine, the representative of DTEC, he'll tell us what will happen in the energy sector, the energy which will never vanish, but is the totally unavoidable necessity to change, because the energy sector is changing itself. It will be, but who knows how it will look like soon. We have the representative of the Tetrapack company who wants break through the whole market and changed the rules of the game. Now the question: how can we live when everything has changed already? Do you need to change more, or is this the license for immortality? And the representative of the Development Bank of Singapore, the bank which was named the most innovative bank in the world. This is the small country and not that huge bank, but in some sense it changes the future of the whole banking system, is a pioneer. So to begin, I would ask you to show the small video reel to provide you with the context. We are living in the extremely dynamically and rapidly changing time. Geopolitical changes, volatility of the markets, digital gap, the new players which push out the existing ones out of the value chain, the startups which offer the totally new products. All of that negatively impacts the profitability of the companies, and the durability of their life is becoming less and less. The experts are sure that the companies need constant changes. You need to find continuously the opportunities for such transformations, even if everything is fantastic and good, and it seems that you don't need to change anything. The transformation is a necessity, not one of the opportunities. Though, if CEO or the supervisory board understands the necessity of transformation, this is still not the guarantee of success. If the colleagues, if the employees are not ready for the changes, the transformation will never happen. This is the classical story. You should change, either you will die. 30% of the companies out of the list Fortune 500 are risking to vanish from the market during the next 10 years. How can we change to survive? So before we come into the panel discussion, we'd ask you to vote, because we have a question. Could we show the question on the screen? Will the Ukrainian enterprises be able to survive under the conditions of the fourth industrial revolutions? You can vote in the chat bot or at the website. So to vote, you need to enter this code P227. So will the Ukrainian companies survive under the conditions of the fourth industrial revolution? So let's begin. My first question will be to Mr. Milan Lakhani, Head of Strategy and Business Development of the Konica Minolta Incorporated. Milan, you're in the process of transformation. You're already there. Would you please tell how can you let the innovative culture let in such a big corporation like Konica Minolta? We said that the culture is the main opportunity and the main restrictor. We are not discussing whether we need to change the culture. Of course we need, but how?
So, firstly, a very warm good afternoon. It is really warm. I was expecting to bring my winter coat here as well for the first visit to Ukraine, and it's turned to be a beautiful day today. So it's a privilege to be here, so thank you for the invitation. Transformation, change, innovation, keywords, buzzwords, maybe some might say. So coupling innovation and transformation together in the first place. Where does transformation begin? And for me, it begins with me. And when I joined Konica Minolta, we're undergoing a massive transformation. When we think about disruption and digitalization, if we take a step back, what is culture and the culture of innovation? How would you define culture? Personally, it could be a sense of belonging, that we follow a set of values within a corporation, within our own region, within our own country, and our company. Many organizations have the word innovation in their company values, but what's the substance behind it? And the history of Konica Minolta, we're 145 years young, and without innovation over the years, we would not still be continuing. So innovation is not really a new thing per se, but it's a very different aspect of looking at it as part of transformation under the Industry 4.0 umbrella. And when we think about innovation from a triangle that you see in front of you, incremental innovation is something as business processes. It should be a continuous cycle. But the way we apply innovation within Konica Minolta and really building this culture of innovation to be truly transformative and disruptive. We're very lucky to have a CEO that has a vision, and his vision is not to stay the same way as we have been before, and if we don't disrupt, we will be disrupted. So looking at the culture right from the top, and leadership has to be the key sponsor, but that's not enough. We're a company, a global family, I would say, of just under 45,000 people, looking at creating these different business models and disrupting in the way that we do business, so creating new areas, new technologies, and understanding the impact on our customers and the society. And how is it defined? So we look at the emerging markets, the emerging trends, emerging technologies, and this word I heard today that when you see on the right-hand side the word shinka, I think shinka means something in Ukrainian, perhaps, as well. But the Japanese word of the day, shinka, is evolution. So we began our cultural transformation back in 2014, and we invested in setting up innovation centers, looking at how people trigger change, not technology. So we were essentially different business units across the world. And then we had this transformation towards a one company approach. And one company approach led us then to think about how do we look at this word innovation and embed innovation in a way that is institutionalized. It should not just be the Business Innovation Center, which is where I sit, that's innovating products, services. Innovation is from inside as well as outside throughout the whole company. So going back to your question, we have developed a very interesting entrepreneurship program to trigger the change of innovation from a cultural point of view. And that means we have employees and colleagues that spend 6 months as part of an innovation program, and they spend 10% of their time innovating in terms of creating new products, platforms, or services. So we're really going from a product-centric mindset to one that's providing solutions and services. And the final part is, without a strategy and a very clear and clearly communicated vision, it will not work. So we have to define the vision right at the top, and then make sure that it's communicated very clearly, that everyone feels part of this journey.
You know, you told me, ты сказал мне, когда мы встречались.
You told me when we met that this strategy has the name of Shinka, right? In Ukrainian, shinka is ham. It's ham, not bacon, it's ham. So this is one of the Ukrainian symbols, shinka, that is ham. So does Ukrainian office of Konica Minolta have the chance and conditions to become part of this shinka? Don't we have culturological restrictions or maybe any limits? And whether this such post-Covid Soviet country like Ukraine, in a cultural way, can overcome such transformation and become the part of the global innovative process?
It's a really good question. This is my first time in KIEF, as I said. And this morning, as we were coming to this beautiful venue, my colleague stopped by and said, this market in town has a clock. And if you look deeply inside the clock, it has a Minolta logo inside the clock. So culture, Minolta, before we merged in 2003, Konica and Minolta were two separate organizations, and we became Konica Minolta. We set up the office here in 1989. So this is at the Soviet era.
Это украинский офис полностью, то есть все украинцы.
So is it the totally Ukrainian office, right?
We have now continued to build a very strong team here of 85 colleagues. And part of, actually, I'd say 5, 6 colleagues from here are part of this entrepreneurship program for the last 3 years. So they have the knowledge, they bring it back here and apply it even further. So we then evolve continuously as a company. So for Ukraine, very strong advocate of innovation, and at the same time, it's learning from each other. It's not just a one-way thing. So we need to learn more about the Ukrainian culture as well. So hence, I'm here to learn from everyone as well.
Мы знаем, что другие...
We know that other product companies you are competing with and competed 10, 15 years ago, in different situations, the part of them will never survive. Your key competitors. If Konica Minolta did not begin the transformation process, how long would it survive? How long would exist this business model where you used to be? For 7, 8, 10 years ago?
Yeah, good question as well. When we think about Konica Minolta in terms of surviving, the fact that we have been going for this 145 years is recognition of our transformation. But equally, if we don't disrupt ourselves, we will be disrupted, right? And our core business around providing solutions of print, and many people, I'm sure many here in the room will say, if I ask Konica Minolta, how do you know us? Mostly people say a camera business or a print business. But in fact, we do a lot more. So we have a focus on mammography, radiography, in terms of healthcare. We have industrial solutions. So we have quite a diverse portfolio already. In terms of how we are transforming, as part of the business innovation team, we're looking at the emerging technologies in the area of workplace or workplace of the future, thinking about smart office or augmented vision. And we've heard today in the topics around artificial intelligence or blockchain, etc. Why would we, as a business which is very traditional Japanese focused, even focus on these areas? But that's what we're doing. So robotics and automation, augmented reality, virtual reality, smart glasses. So the main thing here is that we don't just build brand new things in terms of innovating on the edge, we also focus on the core. And as part of the core, from a business model point of view, I'm sure the professor can add a lot more from an academic perspective, we look at the S-curve. So when we think about print, camera, the essence is very much around imaging. So we look at the S-curve grow, and the imaging goes into the next iteration of augmented reality or smart glasses. And the biggest benefit we have is that the sponsor for us is our CEO. And that's really the biggest benefit, to make sure that we're one step ahead of our competition, a new competition as well.
New competition. Thank you so much. Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Professor. Mr. Loren Graham is the MIT professor. I saw the recording of your fantastic speech in St. Petersburg, where you said about the difference between the invention and innovation. You said that in the post-Soviet countries, Russia, Ukraine, they have the huge intellectual potential. But that's not it. Would you please tell us, will Ukraine be able to become an innovative country? Will Ukraine be able to become successful on the way of innovations? And whether, if it can, how much time do we need for them? And what do we need to do for that? What must happen?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I would like to, in as polite a way as I can, disagree with what I see as an assumption built into this panel, or at least to the introduction we had. That assumption seems to be that technology is changing so rapidly that corporations must change. And my point is that technology is changing so rapidly that countries, nations, governments, cultures must change. Unless they do, the corporations won't have a chance. The corporations cannot do what is necessary to be done unless their cultures permit that. Let me try to illustrate that. Most countries, including Ukraine, trying to become producers of high technology, concentrate on the technology itself. They ask, how can they invent the next big thing? How can they organize research and development centers that will help them to become knowledge economies? They do not concentrate on creating the kind of society that will automatically produce new technology and make it successful. What kind of a society is that? It's a society that has a fair legal system, a society that protects intellectual property, and a society that is free from corruption, and a society that allows entrepreneurs the freedom they need, and a society that values people who rebel from the norm. I call those persons who emphasize technology instead of societal reform people who want the milk without the cow. They do not understand that commercial success in high technology has societal origins. The people who stress technology itself rather than the fertile soil that technology needs to develop do not, in my opinion, appreciate the difference between invention and innovation. An inventor is a person who does something useful that has never been done before. Congratulations, you're an inventor. But an innovator, on the other hand, is a person who makes a commercial success of that invention. And that's where society comes in. In order to be an innovator, one needs a certain kind of society. Excuse me for saying this, but Ukraine does not have that kind of society. It has many inventors, and I congratulate them, and it has very few innovators. Inventors don't change the world. Innovators do. Let me give some examples. And since I'm a historian of technology, they'll be a little historical, but I'm going to come back to the present. The first digital computer in continental Europe was produced right here in Ukraine by Sergei Lebedev, not far from here in a place called Feofania. That computer was called the Mesim, and it's actually very fast for its time and had some interesting features. But who on international markets buys a Ukrainian computer today? That's the difference between invention and innovation. Another example, again historical, is Igor Sikorsky. He built right here in KIEF, in his father's garden, a series of airplanes. One of them was a multi-engine airliner, and he flew it from St. Petersburg to KIEF. His plane was a 4-motor giant that could carry 16 people at a time, a record at that moment. But today, Ukraine is not a major producer internationally of commercial airliners. Again, the difference between invention and innovation. I know that Ukraine has an airplane company called Antonov, but it doesn't begin to compete with Boeing or Airbus. Some people will say these examples are too historical. Okay, I'll try to give a contemporary example. Each year, there's held an international collegiate computer programming contest to test the university students of many different countries in their ability in computer programming. In these contests, Ukraine has done very well. Both Taras Shevchenko KIEF National University and Lviv National University have won gold medals. But although Ukraine has many software companies, none is as important on international markets as its native talent would justify. Why does the demonstrated Ukrainian talent in computer science not show up in greater commercial success? Ukraine is not as good commercially as it should be based upon the talent that it possesses. There are many reasons for this failure, but one might start by looking at corruption. According to Transparency International's Corruption Index, Ukraine is far more corrupt than the countries which dominate the international software industry and the international computer industries. Out of respect for my hosts, I will not say just how low Ukraine ranks, but corruption is a major, major problem here. It is very difficult to develop a successful international company if one's own country is corrupt. What do these examples show? They show that being first in producing a given technology, or being very good in native talent in a technological field, is not enough to get a benefit from that technology. That priority and that talent must have a chance to prosper in a healthy society. Most people who strive to develop high technologies emphasize the initial invention phase and not the kind of society that would make a success of high technology. They create science cities. They create clusters. They try to replicate Silicon Valley by government fiat. They call for startups. Rarely do they call for an open, free market, democratic, corruption-free, legally fair society. These people who emphasize technology want the milk without the cow. And cows cannot survive in a jungle. The robust and protected cow, which you need, which Ukraine needs, is a healthy society that is free from corruption, democratic politically, adventurous economically, creative educationally, and protective legally. You need to start with a productive cow, not with the milk that will come from that cow. I welcome your observations and questions.
Professor, thank you so much. You must know that Ukraine is a very agrarian country, so the comparison with the cow is not from space. We understand it. This is what we face every day. Maybe in the childhood we even met real cows. This is not an abstract image, of course, for us in Ukraine. Evangeliu from DTEX city. Professor Graham said that we're speaking not about the transformation of corporations, but about the transformation of countries and markets. markets, that a corporation cannot change without the environment. The energy sector, in fact, the history of the country scale. Energy market is something which is much bigger than one separate company. We were speaking that the market will be changing. So what should happen at this market for us to have something besides the rule of law, the corruption? What must happen culturologically at this market in a cultural way, from the point of view, from the attitude of consumers, rules of the game, for the market to have the future? What should happen in the world and in this market? What does DTEC believe in? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Now we are discussing the changes of the companies, the cultures, the people, the changes of the business and transformations. And of course, all of those changes of the business will never be successful without the transformation of the basic elements of the infrastructure. And such thing, which is comprehensible but rather complicated, like supply of electrical energy and connection to the electrical grids, defines how the business will develop. During the recent years, this business, transformations of the energy business, has become much rapid. It is speeding up. So besides the conventional energy sector, we have the totally new paradigm of energy business. What does it mean? That if on the one hand we got used to see energy business as big electric stations, electric grids, where the main task is to transfer electrical energy and to maintain that, the modern market is a technological business. Emerging of the renewables, a big amount of data, the new role of the grids, where connection becomes really the most important element of the development of the infrastructure and competitiveness of business. For today, the competitiveness indicator of the business, one of the 10, is connectivity to electrical grids. And all of that forms the new paradigm, the new indicator of the development of the business, transformation of energy business, the provision of the whole development of economy of the whole country. It's very interesting that the foundation of those changes is really regulated by the state. And in the whole Europe, the transformation of this business, having this modern state, which began 15 to 20 years ago, on the one hand was the message from the state, because the state said, we have the strategy, we want to develop renewables and decrease the emissions, and which led to the new players, green energy. But on the other hand, it was the understanding of the business how to manage that. Because after the green energy emerging, the wind and solar electrical stations, we saw smaller producers. There were the bigger number of the producers, so we have more players. Then we have households, which began to produce electrical energy, and in Europe there are thousands of them. In Ukraine, for now, this is as well actively developing. When the households have solar panels on the roofs, they produce electrical energy not only for themselves, but to sell into the grid. And after that, the electric cars came. Everybody got used to those cars, which consume electrical energy, but now they consider that they could supply electrical energy, they could give it to the grid. All of those changes in the configuration of the energy system of Europe, which began 15 to 20 years ago and have been developing in each country in its own way, they saw that infrastructure has become the basic to develop all of that. The infrastructure has to manage all this amount of data, information, participants of the market. So now we have clever grids and networks. This is the management of energy sector, which lets us to balance, lets every participant of the market to supply electrical energy, to consume it, and for new businesses to develop. This is the new way the Europe is coming through. Every country has its own individual peculiarities. For instance, Italy has 100% of clever sensors. Other countries are balancing and not so actively investing. In Ukraine, we are at the stage when next year we are opening the market of electrical energy and we have active reforms in the energy sector, and the changes of the configuration of the electrical grids, the management of the smart grid, is what Ukrainian market needs today. Because historically, yes, we are with the infrastructure we are having, but still, today the market is changing in the country substantially. The participants of the market have the boom of solar energy for the production. We can see that in the companies in our regions. We have the active growth of electrical cars. In prosumers, we have the changes in the configuration of the market, and it defines that the business of the grids, transformation of the energy business, is moving into the digital parts, the innovations, to focus upon the client, the consumer. Of course, it depends on the state, the implementation of the state programs of smart grid and so on. But now this is the time when we can act. And we in DTEC, we are acting. We are implementing the projects, the first projects, which are rather big and interesting. This year, together with the team of ProDTEC, we issued the Accelerator, a very cool project, with the team of 300 startups. Ukrainian cool ideas which suggested something new to the energy sector. They came to us with the suggestions. We selected 10 finalists, and now we're looking what can be implemented. In December, we'll finalize it. We form now the map of the digital vision with the Ukrainian companies, Ukrainian representatives, the drone manufacturing, the first pilot projects where the drones investigate the electric grids. The information is automatically analyzed, and then according to that we can take decisions on the investments. We are actively developing solar energy. We are moving along the transformation of energy as a basic branch of the infrastructure, which will provide all of the changes for the country, for its development, for the development of economy. And it's really important that those are the steps, first steps, that need to be supported and further implemented, because now we have a wonderful opportunity to begin the active movement to transform the infrastructure for the quality of the services, the quality of provided services to be felt by every single person. Ivan, I have a question. When we listened to Milan and Loren, they said that the culture is the most important thing. DTEC is the old industrious company where the innovations are not that well spread. Well, at least it looks like that. How do you plan? Can you cope with this challenge to change the culture? If yes, then how? Well, yes, the challenge is the one which we can cope with, of course. We have the understanding that we are changing this culture even now. Those projects which maybe were not that usual for DTEC, because we were the representatives of the classical electrical sphere, the digital accelerator projects, those are the projects where we are working with the young, new enterprises and businesses, young people, but we are integrating that into the classical configuration of the experienced energy sector. Those are the experts, professionals, people with the legend behind them, who know the equipment, who have never worked with such a technology before. So this will be the mix. This is the gradual transformation of the culture and understanding by the people who know that those changes are needed, that the nature of the business is becoming like that. And on the other hand, this is the active integration of the new blood, new people, modern ones who come into the technology with the new approaches, the changes of the culture. That's what moves the people. So the culture will be changing. Yes, definitely. This is our active process. So the energy company is one side, and we have the second side, which used to be consumers only, and now you're looking at them like grids as the potential suppliers. What's the prosumer is? When any household can sell electrical energy to the grid and earn. So each of you, each of the presentees, when you do something and invest enough, you can become a little generating unit. Yes. This is a very relevant topic. In Dnipro city, we can see a very active development of the private households. Yes, this is the city, well, maybe the region of prosumers. because it's more characteristic of the regions, not of the cities, when they have solar panels on the roofs and they produce electrical energy more than they consume themselves. So they sell the rest to the grid by using the green tariff. So yes, this is a very relevant topic. So the change of the culture of not only internal culture but of the whole market, yes, because those changes of the market which are taking place, and the market of Ukraine is moving in the same direction as Europe does, just the same direction, maybe not that rapidly, because overall our changes are a bit lagging behind, but still we're moving on to this market, and the client forms the need of changes in the company, because before that our technical specialists didn't know how to work with that. We didn't have that at the market before. We didn't have prosumers. Nobody knew how to work with that. And now we are starting. Now we have new trained young people who understand the equipment, know how to work with that, and this is the mix which has to change the company further on, and it is already changing it. So if you had an opportunity to tell to the audience as the potential prosumers or maybe even innovators who can come to you, what call to action would you do? I would appeal for you and to see electrical companies as a partner with whom you can communicate, with whom you can implement projects, and with whom you can implement new businesses. We saw that in the accelerator, really nice new projects which can be done together with the traditional classical energy sector, which is being transformed now. While Ivan was saying, the percentage of those who believe increased a bit, because we used to have 65% and 35% did not believe. So I have 3%. Yes, 3% are yours. Ivan has mentioned that we are having this shift, and he spoke about electric cars. Today I read in the website that Tesla, as for the sales volume, during the third quarter, they had 80,000 cars sold, which is more than BMW X7 and other comparative models of the same class. So the message was the following, that electric cars are much more durable than the carbon, right? The carbon, well, the fuel, okay, let it be fuel and diesel ones, and that mostly now we have a very harsh disruption in the automobile industry. And the automobile industry, how we know it, it's almost over. It's happening just now. We don't notice that, but in fact, we already crossed this border, and the electric cars are not the future. We won't just replace one car onto another. Those will be the cars which will be working not for 10 or 15 years, but up till 80 years. They will be more durable and long-term. So we have the representatives of Tetrapack company now. Mr. Eric Wimberg, Vice President of Strategic Planning. This is the company which came with this disruptive technology and totally made the world changed. So, Eric, I have the question. The innovation you came with, is it the license for the whole life for you? So maybe you shouldn't do anything else. You've done your lot, you've changed the market, and now you're safe forever, right? I'll give you the clicker, just a second.
That's not true. If it were true, they wouldn't need a vice president of strategic planning. So fortunately for me, it's not. Tetrapack is a successful company, I have to say. I don't know what I do to get another slide up here. I'm an ex-consultant, so I cannot speak without a slide behind me. But if you look at the history of Tetrapack, it is really quite an incredible success story today, until today. We've basically had unbroken volume growth, and by volume we mean how many packs we sell, since we were founded in 1956. I tried to figure out when we first came to Ukraine. It's a little bit complicated because, of course, then it was the Soviet Union. But I can tell you, the Soviet Union, we entered in 1961. So we have been here for a long time. We've been global more or less forever. And there's been quite a few learnings for what kind of innovation and what kind of transformation works well and what is less likely to work well. Of course, as you said, Tetrapack is founded on a few breakthrough innovations, but not that many. There was one that started it all, and there was one that totally changed the game in about 1970, and you can see what happened from that point of view. The whole concept was the foundation of the company, but the pack then looked like what this woman is drinking. There are limits to how many of those you can sell in the world. But once the brick was developed, I mean the normal shape you have today, in about 70, that's when growth really took off. There's been a lot of innovation since that time, and you see some examples of the things that no one thought about in 1960 or 1970. That is what we sell today. Totally different types of packs, totally different type of equipment, totally different services. Most of the successful innovation we have done throughout the decades have been incremental innovations. Incremental innovations focusing on the needs of our same core customers. For example, you might think there's a limit to how many different ways you can fold a carton package. Well, we haven't found that limit yet. Many small improvements that sustain the relevance is really what has driven most of this growth. What has not worked so well for us, with a few exceptions, fortunately, is breakthrough innovations. Trying to meet a totally different need with a totally different technology. There isn't really a single really good example of success there. I don't know how many people here, for example, know what the Tetrapack Rigello is. That's exactly what I thought. One of many breakthrough projects, very expensive ones, that totally failed. Trying to develop a solution for, the beer market turned out to be not such a good idea. So for us, really to start with a transformational innovation and then build on that all the time, focusing on the needs of our customers, is really what has ultimately led us to a totally different technology base than what we started out. But it's been incremental and customer focused, at least the part that worked. Another thing which another reason why we've been able to sustain the success to date is a couple of big transformations of the company, really big ones. In all cases, I'll tell you what they were, but in all cases they were forced upon us. We had to go through them, not because we wanted, because we had to. One of those transformations happened in the early 90s, and I'm sure you can all relate to it being forced to go through a transformation. One of them happened in the early 1990s, where we were found in breach of European Union competitive laws. We were deemed to be a dominant player who was abusing that position, trying to restrict competition. I'm not going to argue that that judgment was wrong, although most in Tetrapack would. It doesn't matter. We were found to be in breach of EU competition laws. This is a big deal. This can kill almost any company. We totally had to transform our governance and how we work to ensure, first of all, that we actually stopped doing anything which is considered normal competitive behavior in most markets. That includes price discrimination, it includes bundling, it includes quite a lot of normal behaviors that you cannot do if you're a dominant player. And those restrictions are with us today. The other part we had to do as a result of that transformation is to establish extremely strong governance of how we behave in every decision in every market, and ensure everyone is always following the rules, and ensure that there are severe consequences for anyone who doesn't. That was a massive transformation, not one that all companies would survive. We had another transformation very shortly after, where we discovered that the way we have been working with information systems could actually break this company to pieces as well. We don't have a global control of information, since we have grown in a very decentralized way. So we started a transformation project to build our own internal ERP system. And you can guess what happened with that. It was a disaster. It failed. I'm not going to tell you how much money we lost, but it was big. We tried again using a standard system, and we failed again. And finally, we did it the third and the last time, using something that was new at the time called SAP, and that was horribly painful, ridiculously expensive, changed the culture of the company from being very decentralized to being very centralized. Those two transformations are actually part of why we are around today as well. Painful as they were, they gave us something. The anti-competitive case gave us a very strong governance in a global company that operates in all sorts of markets, which is one reason why we are still preferred as a partner to do business with from companies like Nestlé and Pepsi. I don't think we would have the chance to do what we do today unless we change behavior. This IT system gave us a chance to actually change more quickly as a global company. Painful as it is to install something like that, once you have it, you can do things you never realized. So for us, this is mainly a story about incremental innovation, about a couple of transformations that made us a stronger company. It is not so much a story about multiple instances of breakthrough innovations. Now, if we look forward, we are paranoid. We are not at all certain that this will continue. And in fact, we see that we have to perform a different type of innovation and a different type of transformation if this is going to last. We are actually, as an industry, at an inflection point, or maybe a couple, where things will change very quickly now. And there are three things we've realized are happening now, and if we deal with it right, we can continue this development, and if we don't, somebody else will take over our role. The first one is the need to connect the food industry. There's a lot of talk about technology, Industry 4.0, information systems, it's all relevant. The question is, what will you do with it? And what we see is that once the food industry, and I use this term more broadly than just dairy, once that is starting to get connected, we are starting to see a lot of potential gains, efficiency, flexibility, things we couldn't do before. That's what we need to use technology for. And this wave is much faster than previous waves of technology development. That means you have to innovate in a different way. You can do things incrementally, but they have to be fast. Our mantra in this area, by the way, is I think a pretty good one. It's learned by experience. It's not an academic thing. It's think big, start small, but most importantly, start. The other part, which we think is perhaps a bigger challenge really for our industry and for us, is the sustainability agenda. It needs to be rethought. Doing more of what we've done before is not going to be enough. In the energy sector, you're very familiar with this. We have some challenges as a planet. There are long-term in nature, but we need to act now. We have other challenges that are driven by consumer sentiment and regulation. Consumers need answers to the sustainable agenda. They want progress. They want faster progress than before. And regulators are happy to help them with at least giving the impression of success. So we are seeing very dramatic changes now to the plastics industry. No one has the answer for what the response should be. So we need to totally rethink our sustainability agenda and be more progressive. So those are disruptions that I think are relevant to Tetrapack, relevant to our industry, and they may be relevant to your industry as well. The third one is to transform the way we work. And of course, you're always changing the way we work, but I think what we're seeing now is different. We've always tried to do our innovation internally with some partners, but we want to control things. To drive the sustainability agenda, you have to work with the whole industry and partners. To connect the food industry, by definition, you have to connect with the people. As a large global company, we see that we need to make the borders more porous. We need to break down borders. between parts of the company, between our company and others, and across nations. That's really the only way we're going to be able to develop on this agenda. And technology is great. It creates new, cooler ways of working, but those technology tools will give you nothing unless you can attract young talent. And I would argue that one of the leading indicators, if your transformation agenda is working, is are you able to attract, motivate and challenge, and retain the best young talent? Or are you seeing the average age of your employee go up by 1 year every year? So that's another area where we need to change who we are.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. A very short question, if I understood you right, just to clarify that the innovations is something very rapid. So before trying to innovate, the big companies must have a digital transformation first to have an opportunity to change rapidly. Do I understood it right? Because it seemed to me a very important message from you, because we are speaking about innovations so much, but not everyone has conducted this process of digital transformation. Not everyone has become the full-scale digital companies and already thinking about the next big thing.
I wouldn't say that all innovation is very rapid, or not all meaningful innovation. I mean, what you're trying to do is to create a somewhat better version of something people recognize, usually. And that takes time to get right, and it takes time to roll out. In the digital area, the cycles are so much faster. The food industry, food and beverage industry, which we're active in, is slow. It is behind. What is ahead is, I think, media, obviously, financial services, perhaps, more so. Utilities are way ahead of the food and beverage industry. But, you know, the innovation methods they use are increasingly coming into our industry as well. So we need to work in more than one way. I think that's the trick. And, it can feel very frustrating to be behind, to feel behind, and to think I need to work faster now. But I would also take some encouragement of that. One of my favorite quotes about innovation and future is by William Gibson, a Canadian author, who said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." And if you think that way, you can find the answer to what you need to do next and how you need to work faster.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. So when we spoke to Mr. Bidyut Dumra, what is going on and what Bank of Development of Singapore is, we began with, well, we communicated and I asked the question about his biography and I asked whether it's true that you are an actor. He said, yes, it's true. I asked whether you have been an actor in Bollywood. He said, yes. And I asked, how was it? And he said, well, in fact, this is approximately the same which is going on here. This is a very important scale to move on. And then he told me the story that Bank of Singapore is the bank which is acknowledged to be one of the most innovative. But 15 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, right? When did you begin the real change? Even 10 years ago, it was a kind of a very strict mode of the bank, a very slow state, a non-efficient one, which had very complicated situation in the relationship with the customers. And when I asked the question, how the vision looks like, what it consists of, but you told me, well, people need not a bank, people need banking. So this is the philosophy. And when we understood that people don't need banks, and they need just nice banking, since that moment, everything became much more comprehensible, where to move to. Would you please tell me, what has happened during those 10 years, and how did it turn out that you managed, that you coped? Which tools did you use? Which were the stages? About 3 or 4 minutes would you spend telling us how out of old, awkward bank on the island, you've been transformed into the most innovative bank of the world. And what does it mean, the most innovative bank of the world?
Yes, it is true. I'll grab the clicker off you, Eric, if I could. It is true that 9 years back, DBS was completely different. At the previous panel, I was mentioning that if you asked anyone what is DBS, they would say, damn, bloody, slow. We were at the bottom of the customer ratings, and like you say, no one wants to be at the bottom. So we did go through a transformation, and from a transformation perspective, we actually broke it up into 2 chunks. The first transformation was all around the business. We were looking at, if we are very slow, we want to be faster, so we introduced lean into the organization. We also repositioned what our service was. We said we were an Asian bank, and we wanted to provide an Asian service. But it was very hard to define what is an Asian service. And we came down to this notion of RED, R-E-D, to be respectful, easy to deal with, and dependable. So we went through all these transformations, and that brought us up to 2014. But in 2014, we started getting some good results. But that's when we realized that while we were busy looking down and making a change inside, outside the bank, the industry had changed completely. And very unexpectedly in certain areas. We knew that all the startups were coming, so all the fintechs, and we found that the fintechs were coming at a much, much rapid scale. So some of the stats I had mentioned earlier is we have Alibaba. So Alibaba and DBS both transact over $100 billion, but Alibaba took 11 months, we took 49 years. So that was a huge difference. And from our perspective, we also then noticed that a lot of the large tech companies, Apple came with Apple Pay, Android Pay, we found all the larger players were jumping into the game. The thing that we noticed that there was also the access to new technology, the access to be able to change had also changed. And I like what you said, Milan, at the start, because it starts with you. So I'll just flick through on a couple of quick slides. So that's very hands-on. So even with me, when I look at my own journey, I'm a bit of an entrepreneur. I challenge myself every year to start one company of my own. So most of my companies don't survive, but I do have a couple. But going 10 years back, when I wanted to start a company, it was a lot harder. It took a lot of thinking in regards to how I would have to set it up, what I would need, how do I get the resources together. Nowadays, with all these platform companies, I just need a credit card, or even with some of them, I just need an email address, and I can get services, I can get, even from the latest company with Google, I can contract a data scientist for 15 minutes at 70 cents. So it completely changed the game. So from our perspective, we said, okay, we've been competing as a bank, and in our transformation, we sort of knew how banks would operate. And for the competitors that we were racing against, we got a little ahead. But the realization was, it was a complete different race. We had complete new players, we had complete new things in the market. So while we had focused from a tech perspective, now this is 2014, everything in red is bad. By 2014, we had changed that, but it wasn't enough because everyone had caught up, and these larger companies had way more resources than us. So our true notion or our true strategy had to be the talent, the people. We went through this notion of saying, for us, we don't know what's around the corner, but if we had the people with the right mindset, we would figure it out when we needed to. So we came onto this notion of re-augmenting a banker into becoming what we call a digital banker. And we decided to invest heavily into this people strategy of digifying everyone. So to give you an example, I run innovation for the organization. Now they say in innovation you should not have any rules, but we have one rule. The one rule is no innovation allowed. The innovation team is not tasked to create innovations, but to create innovators. Don't solve problems, create problem solvers. So in that regard, we said we don't want the future of the organization to be with one team. It has to become the job of everyone. So even our data officer, his task, of course, is he's got data scientist, but his task is to make everyone in the organization also be data aware, data conscious, and a base level data scientist. So this year, even our board went through hands-on training on how to use data. The same with Agile, so all our transformation, human centricity or design thinking, the notion was that everyone in the organization had to be a practitioner rather than just pockets of teams. So our entire strategy has been around this, creating this digital banker, this notion of a digital banker having hard skills and soft skills. And this combination of having both would be how we would propel ourselves. So that took us through this notion of recrafting our agenda from 2014 onwards to have a very digital focus, and has, I guess, taken us to where we are right now.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. You're speaking about the bank, which how many people are working now and how many people were working 9 years ago? How many people are working now in DBS and how many people have been working in 2009?
The organization? So in the organization that time, so the entire total strength of my team or the total strength of the entire organization? So we've got 24,000 at that time and now we're at 26,000.
So this is a big organization, right?
We regard ourselves as the Goldilocks size. We're not too small, we're not too big. We're just right to be able to move fast as we need to.
What did allow such a big organization to go through such changes and transformations? Because very often I can hear that in the small organizations, the changes of the culture are comprehensible, but in the big, huge corporations, it's totally impossible. This is the case when size does matter. So how did it turn out? Does any sized company has the chance to transform? And if yes, what do you need for that? Maybe top 3 points. What's important for the big organization, just for the big one?
So from our perspective, one of the key things was similar to the F&B industry with Tetrapack. There were certain external forces. We didn't have a choice. We had to change. So sometimes when we look at our entire transformation, we call it the near-death experience because we were at that cusp. And so in regards to the things or the 3 points, one is from a leadership perspective, we put a heavy stress on leaders to lead. So from that perspective, the support, the mandate that comes from the top is very critical. When we set on our transformation, our entire purpose was built around making banking joyful. And that quote that you mentioned, that was actually Bill Gates had said that. So from our perspective, we want to reposition banking. So this notion of making banking joyful was very aspirational. You're looking at an organization what was damn bloody slow, having this aspiration of making banking joyful. So that was a big pull. People want to be part of something. They want to be part of something big, something meaningful, something impactful, to your point, something that makes a difference. And even when we looked at banking as an enabler to society. So from that perspective, we, being the development bank, one of the major banks in Singapore, we had that. So the leadership support in regarding to crafting that purposeful mandate. In regards to the people agenda, we had a very strong people agenda and we started creating rituals and programs right from the bottom. We knew that senior management could push the door open, but we needed to sustain it from the bottom up. And we worked heavy on this, what we call human engineering. So for example, if I ask each of you every Monday, tell me something new you've learned. Now, every Monday, if you know I'm going to ask you, you'll soon find that within the week, you're going to look for things that are new. And soon enough, you will proactively start finding things. And instead of just having that one new thing to tell me on the Monday morning, you might end up having 5. So it's this notion of how people are engineered and how to then engineer people. We spend a lot of time in the transformation piece. And from a size perspective, even when we had our recent offsite, there was the one question we asked is, does it make a difference? If we were a bigger organization, would it have been harder? So one notion was, yes, a bigger ship is hard to steer, but the flip side is, if you have plenty of resources, you have a lot more people that you can push towards that. So we have this mindset of re-augmenting the bank into acting and thinking like a startup. We've got examples like you've got the Alibabas and the WeChats, and even in India you've got the Paytms. These are all startups that were small teams of 5, 10, 15, 20 people. And they now have user bases of 700 million, 300 million. So this notion of what you can do when you have the right attitude and you can put your mind to it, I think size might be irrelevant to a certain, it's attitude that trumps it.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Would you please tell what will happen with DBS in 10 years? Will it still be a bank? What will happen in the banking sphere? Just in a nutshell, what should we be prepared for?
So we think three things might happen. One is we are basically able to craft a very strong digital agenda, and we, as a bank, are very dominant in the future, as a bank. The second might happen is that the brands, so you can talk about the likes of the Googles and the Facebooks, so all the AI interfaces in the middle will be the prominent interface, and banks will just become wires and pipes. We will just provide the services underneath, the plumbing that supports front-end experiences. And the third, we might end up not servicing as we do. Our propositions might be very niche. We might only be servicing maybe the ultra high net worth or the corporates with very specific products, because there will be a commoditization of general banking services. So we don't know exactly, but we've got these three scenarios right now in front of us, and we're hedging our bets. We're sending little teams in every direction to see what happens.
То есть пока что будущее.
So future is here, but so far it's not that widely spread.
The future of now is now. The future of tomorrow is tomorrow.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Dear friends, we've got a bit of time to ask the questions to our speakers from the audience for the Q&A session. As far as I understand, we've got girls in blue dresses, so please raise your hands, take the mic. If you ask the question, please introduce yourself. I don't see, unfortunately, the audience. Are there any questions?
Вы также можете писать вопросы.
You can also write your questions to the chat bot. Good evening. My name is Olga Krupska. I'm the president of the Fund of National Development and Innovations, and I'm interested in the following, the opinion, and especially of the foreign speakers. We have conducted a huge analysis with lots of our partners, and it shows that the density of innovations in the 21st century is decreasing. And the corporations today are not the sponsors of the progress. And some outbursts of the successes of the last 20 years are mostly Web 2.0, which are connected with online, and the edge, the mix of the existing technologies. So how do our experts see this trend? And in your opinion, how can we counteract this trend? Thank you.
Something. So yes, from our side, from a banking perspective, we are very cognizant and conscious that the next big thing can happen outside banking. When the financial crisis happened, a lot of the innovation or the R&D funding in banks got moved and pushed towards compliance. So a lot of the banks that had innovation agendas suddenly had compliance agendas. Banks that had risk appetites suddenly were extremely risk averse. Now, that changed from an industry perspective. Now, as the industry is getting more healthier, there is more innovation that's creeping back in. Innovation labs have started in nearly every bank. So there is a bit of a change, but yes, a lot of the external industry has got a head start. And the other is the expectation from our customer. So while the banks have been focusing on their compliance, the customer has got used to a whole bunch of new services. They've got new expectations, and that hasn't changed. So all the startups and fintechs have started feeding and supplying that big gap, that need. So from our perspective, we see a lot of these startups as very opportune for collaboration. So we have very conscious gateway programs that help startups work with the bank. And we consume a lot of the technology because that gives us acceleration. So from our perspective, we can see that this partnering or collaborative approach is one that works really well. We've had a lot of success with it. One of the examples is we do a lot of recruitment, and our HR teams they were struggling because they had so many candidates to look at. So there was a startup that had an AI HR solution. So we picked that solution and brought it into the bank, and this year 600 people will be hired into the bank via an AI chatbot. So it's an AI agent will be finding the candidates, screening them, interviewing them, and hiring them. So we found that these pockets of innovation we can take advantage of by collaborating rather than competing with them.
Спасибо большое. Возможно...
Thank you so much. Maybe anyone else wants to answer?
I don't recognize the lower level of innovation than in the past, really. But obviously the impact of Web 2.0 and IT innovation is making more and more of an impact. I would say that on the normal product innovation we see in the food industry, one thing that is different and perhaps leads to fewer innovations maybe, is that the impact these days of a new food product is global. Before you have many local innovations, now it's very global very quickly. Before you could try a product in one country and if it didn't work, you tried it in another country. That doesn't work anymore. A failure is a global failure. And a success can be a global success. But on the impact of IT, I think what we have to separate the impact of Industry 4.0 in what can help us drive incremental innovation, which is simply adding a capability to our normal process, versus the things that are disruptive. Those ideas that are disruptive, we have to separate out, protect away from all large company cultures, processes, organizations, and financing discussions, and treat separate. I think that's a learning.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much.
Live example of how we've been innovating for the last 3 to 4 years on what's seen as being the number one transformation for Konica Minolta. And the challenge was, we started 4 years ago with a blank piece of paper. It was, how do we look at the future of our business by creating new portfolios of products and services to really transform ourselves. But then looking at the core, we have over 2 million customers that use our print solutions, meaning that 1 meter by 1 meter space in 2 million offices around the world. How can we innovate upon that based upon closer customer engagements where we know that some aspects of print might be declining, some might be increasing, but the fact that we have this many customers already, so we're occupying that space. So that's part one. Part two, to answer your question, was around emerging technologies. So, edge computing, IT on-site, for example. So what we've done is created what we call a workplace hub, which is essentially that print in the corner, or printer in the corner, becoming your IT solution provider, as well as your printing and imaging and copying. And that, it's literally the last 3 to 4 years on how we balance the innovation of being incremental to then being disruptive and transformational. So that's something that we're doing.
Спасибо большое, Лорен.
Thank you so much, Professor Loren.
I think a basic change is occurring right now. Those people who believed in open societies and freedom of speech and free information are experiencing a bit of a crisis, because we've learned in the last few years that information is not necessarily the more information you have is not necessarily a good thing. There is harm that can be caused by information. For a person like me, who always all my life believed in freedom of speech and open societies, that's a bitter pill. It's difficult for me to adjust to that. And I think that we have to do it. We have to learn how to, am I going to say it? Regulate information. That goes down hard. I don't like it. But I think we're going to have to learn how to do it.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Pavlo Kozyrev, the head of Association of Small Towns of Ukraine. I've got a question to Ivan. You have the big asset of DTEC. Those are thermal electrical stations, and the majority of them are in the smaller towns, which emerged thanks to those electric stations. And both you and those towns are facing serious challenges because they're using coal. And rather soon, we will have to refuse to use coal. From the point of view of the strategy, how does DTEC see this day, this doomsday? Will you just lock it away and leave, or do you consider any new life for those small towns and energy clusters? Do you look at the new life for those electric stations? It's really important. As Professor Graham said, that not only countries have to change, but the communities have to change. This is a big challenge for those towns. Thank you. Thank you, Ivan. I'd like to say that the rumors about this death are much overrated. Yes, of course, thermal generation is not the trend in Europe, and the coal work is not trendy. But still, the work of the heat generation, speaking about the peculiarities, is necessary to cover the balance and to provide the sustainable work of all of the green technologies. So the issue of the volume of work of those electric stations and power plants, and that's what formed in the understanding of the new development of thermal power plants. So I wouldn't say that everybody is closing all of the thermal electric power stations. The experience is different, yes. We are moving to the green technologies. The renewables is what is needed. But still, the need of the balancing capabilities is here. And thermal electric power stations is the basic answer for you. Okay, thank you so much. So far, you're not locking them down. No. Thank you. Any other questions? Good afternoon. My name is Yulia Poroshenko. Thank you so much to all of the participants for such an interesting discussion. I've got the following question. According to the research, 70% of transformational projects of the companies are a failure. And the reason number one is the oppression or the resistance of the employees. Out of your experience, what are the acting tools to help the employees to leave their comfort zone and to overcome the status quo bias? Thank you so much. Does anybody want to answer? Milan?
It's something I wanted to mention earlier on that's been playing in my mind. What is the reason for that? And I feel that the biggest reason is around fear and the fear towards change. And I started off by saying innovation begins with me, but that's not enough. I represent a company which is thousands and thousands of people, and so we need to create this this momentum. And the way that I've seen us do it is, for example, bringing on ambassadors, meaning those people that really follow your vision, and they become your advocates or evangelists. Now, when I joined, I was literally put in the corner and say, you go and innovate, we have our core business to focus on. And there was a fear of the new innovation might lead to me not being in my job anymore. So we went from my change to their change, so that was a team. And ultimately, after some iterations of saying, look, these are the tools, the methods, being very open in our communication. So that's the second thing I would say. And how can they support us into becoming our change? So when from mine to theirs, it's becoming a movement and a momentum. And the biggest thing I've learnt in the last few years is people don't follow the leader. People follow the first follower. So I'll leave it at that.
Спасибо. Эрик.
Yeah, I think I have two completely opposite ideas at the same time about that question. One thing is, of course, that there are plenty of good change management practices and processes and tools you should use. So if you're fairly rigorous about where you are on a change journey and use the appropriate technique at the same time, that's a good thing. I agree with that. At the same time, if you get stuck into change management toolkits, you're lost. It's a lot about having a results focus and a passion and an openness in your communication style and not getting stuck in corporate toolkits. So I think it's, if you're completely oblivious to good change management process, you have a problem. If you only focus on that, you also have a problem. So I think there's no real easy answer, but it's a combination of, passion and process.
Спасибо. Бедют.
I'll just mention two different insights that came across to us. One was going back to this notion of fear. When we looked at the entire organization, and there was this misconception that we would have the top of the organization, the seniors, they knew they had to change, so they were going to change. They were all aboard the train. The people at the bottom, all the new young people that had come in, a lot of them, when they went home, their family members were customers of the bank, so they wanted to change. There was this notion that a lot of the resistance would come in the middle. And we found that a lot of the resistance actually came from different pockets. One interesting pocket was the people that were really good and they were just about to be promoted. So they have done a good job, and now all they had to do was not make a mistake and they would get their next promotion. So that was one pocket that we found that was a little resistant to doing anything outside, because they said it's been working so far, why should I change it? The other is this misconception that the older generation is resistant to change. And from that perspective, we found that totally not true. So I'll give you an example. We introduced, you have the ATM machines, you go and you withdraw money. We had introduced VTM machines. It's a video teller machine. So you can do an ATM function, but if you get stuck or you need anything extra, you can press a button and you'll get like a Skype call, a video call. And when we went and took this, all the young staff were like, no, it has no Instagram filter. People will see me. It was the older people that said, you mean I don't have to walk around, I just sit? And they were the ones that jumped on it first. So there were these little pockets. So when we talk about resistance, you really need to understand the organization and where you are on your maturity. And then it's these little segments that you'll have to, I guess, pay special attention to cater for.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Bidut, I have the question in Telegram to you and to other participants. How DBS Bank and other panelists, what's your attitude to cryptocurrencies?
So with cryptocurrencies, I find them very interesting. Now, cryptocurrencies have been around for a while. And it's only now, because a lot of the corporates and a lot of investors are coming in, that people are paying a lot of attention. So two things. One is the technology underneath it, blockchain. So there are a lot of people that are looking at how you can use it. So that's one. But in specific cryptocurrency, I personally think that there is a lot of speculation in cryptocurrency, but more I'm very interested in the indicator of what it's signaling. This notion of a new trust economy, this notion of people looking at a decentralized trust model where they're rebelling against it being hinged, value being hinged to certain people that control the market. That as an indicator is something that I find very interesting, this entire notion of like Airbnb and Uber, when you look at these services, one is you look at the platform and what the platform technology does, but more when you're making a selection, you're looking at the reviews. You are trusting other people's reviews who you don't know. And it's this notion of this peer trust, this notion of setting market value based on non-institutional, that I find from the cryptocurrency, it's those things that I find that are very interesting, because to the point of, if you say the internet is distributed, but it's distributed and it's very successful. You can say there's goods and bads to it, but the notion of trust in the internet as we know it is a little weak. Blockchain or cryptocurrency brings that other layer or veneer on it. So I think very interesting times. So from a bank perspective, of course, we're looking at it like every bank is. But personally, I think the indicators of what cryptocurrency and blockchain stands for and the notions of where people feel trust is in an institutional, non-institutional, government, non-government, fiat, non-fiat, that's the part that I think is very interesting.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much, Ivan. The question to you about, would you name top 3 innovations in the work with your customers and whether the company likes the quality you are giving now? The basic answer, no. We don't like this quality. The quality of the service we are providing, we don't like it. This is an objective opinion. But undoubtedly, we are changing. We are changing the external part. As for the service centers, where we communicate, how we communicate, on the other hand, we are investing into the technology, into the functioning of the call centers and the people. Because undoubtedly, the whole service, as for the electrical energy sales, depends on the people who are communicating with the people. This is the main part. As for the innovations, here, we're going through the period where we implement rather understandable things for a competitive economy and business, like applications. Would you name top 3, just top 3 things? Well, I cannot say that those are innovations in the sales of electrical energy. Innovations in the sales is blockchain only. And so far in Ukraine is not the today's relevant point. For us, it is rather relevant. This is the transfer into online, which is the key part. 50% of clients and customers are paying online, and 10 to 20% are satisfied with that only. So one of our tasks is to change our online service for KIEF and other companies of ours. Secondly, automatization, for people not to go to our service centers and to have the distant service provided. And the third priority, as for the services and new suggestions and solutions, that's what we are doing. We are searching for innovations together with an accelerator. The guys, what can be offered to the customer? Because we have such ideas like storage of electrical energy. We know that there are Tesla batteries for the houses, but it's too expensive in Ukraine. It's not that well developed. But we have Ukrainian solutions on storage. So we are looking at new solutions for our customers. Thank you so much. We have a bit time for the last question. Please introduce yourself and please address it to someone. This is the question to everyone. My name is Andrei Batsuk. I'm from the Ronis company. Ukraine really has lots of inventors, but not enough of innovators. But how, in our Ukrainian culture, can we make this innovation a norm? How can we have this culture of changes and transformations and development? Because mostly we are not ready for changes. How can we make us ready and move on? I would ask Professor Loren to answer, because this is what... Well, I will begin because I'm a practitioner. What we saw in the accelerator with the startups, we really saw lots of inventions which are not commercial. The guys who came to us, they got ideas, got technologies, but they're not commercial. So the question is to create the environment when those ideas are rather can be implemented and become commercial. This is the format of work of the huge companies together with the smaller startups. And this is really a cool project which is being implemented. I'm speaking about that a lot because it's a new one and it can lead to results. This is an opportunity of the new technology which is so far not commercialized together with the huge businesses to make it commercially interesting and successful. It's one of the ways. So to create accelerators, yes, to create them and taking into account the big amount of talented people, creative people who can do that, who create it. This is the real way for new products. Thank you so much. Professor Loren, this is what you said, in fact.
I would recommend a change in attitudes. Develop a hatred for corruption. Corruption requires both perpetrators and enablers. Don't be either one and hate the people you see who are. And connected with that, try to improve your legal system. That's a form of corruption when it doesn't work right. Hope for a legal system that is fair and take action to achieve that.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Dear speakers, thank you so much. In the end, I will ask the question to you, the question which I asked in the beginning to the audience. Are there any chances of Ukrainian companies to overcome, to survive the fourth industrial revolution, to come through those changes and survive? Or they will be replaced, they will be swept by new disruptive businesses, and this is okay. Or maybe they should fight.
Fight, 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 fight.
То есть смысл бороться есть.
So there is certain sense to fight, right?
I mean, even from our perspective, we went through this entire notion, and like I said, I present the near-death experience. And the only difference between me presenting the near-death experience and the death experience is that we stopped talking and we started doing things.
Делать,
So,
делать, делать, делать.
To do something, to do.
There will be many successful Ukrainian companies who have exploited the opportunities of Industry 4.0 if we sit here 10 years from now. Many. I don't think they are the exact same companies that are sitting here now. I think quite a few will disappear. There will be new ones coming, and some of you will transform into something you could never imagine. That is my learning from having worked 25 years ago in a country that doesn't exist anymore, that used to be called Czechoslovakia, and see what happened to many of those companies.
Спасибо большое. Вань.
Me, as a representative of a Ukrainian company, undoubtedly I believe in that. But it's really important for all of the companies to understand where they are and to change. That's what we see. And without that, the risk is huge. But we believe that 68% will be bigger. More than 60. How many? Well, I meant 68 there. Well, yes, we do believe in that. There are certain changes, right? Loren, when we discussed that, you were rather pessimistic in the beginning, right?
Pessimistic about what?
Выживем ли?
Whether we survive, whether Ukrainian companies overcome the transformation, whether they can reinvent themselves, whether they can find the new forms and content.
Unless some really big changes occur of the type I have been talking about, the future for Ukraine, I would predict, is pretty much a continuation of the same. There are a lot of smart people in Ukraine. Ukraine won't pass out of existence. It's not a question of survival. Ukraine will continue and will survive. It's a question of whether it can be a lot better or not than it was in the past. About that, I'm slightly pessimistic, but I see the elements for change if people will just do something about it.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much for this slight belief in us. Milan.
that I'm really believing in the future of Ukraine. In preparation of the forum for today, I read a lot more to familiarize myself about the culture of Ukraine, etc. And one of the really interesting statistics was that 80% of the students between 18 to 24 are in higher education. That's phenomenal if you think about the future of Ukraine. That means that talent is not just now, but that's the future talent. And I feel that Ukrainians shouldn't be shy of all the good things that there are in Ukraine. Sing, let the people outside of Ukraine know that you exist for positive things, not the negative things that's sometimes published, let's say. So I'm the other extreme, and I look forward to supporting the future of Ukraine through where I'm working and beyond. So that's me. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Thank you.